Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am joined by the lovely Herman Steuernagel. I am saying that correctly, right?
You are. You've got it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. I know we were saying, there's so many things going on in life, so much to balance. So I really appreciate you joining.
Yeah, no problem.
So, to kick us off here, I do want to start by saying congratulations on your upcoming book
Thank you.
because that's coming up quite soon, isn't it?
We've got a couple months yet. July 23rd is
Okay.
the launch date. So,
I feel
um,
like I'm going to blink and it'll be tomorrow.
I know. Yeah, I
Really
wanted to
exciting.
I wanted to prep for a long release for it, or a long lead into the release for this one. So,
Okay. Hey, give
yeah,
yourself a little bit more time, eh?
absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Tim is here with
Hi,
us,
Tim.
fellow Canuck. Welcome.
Good to see you.
And those are some awesome covers in the background there. So we're
Thank you
going to
very
talk
much.
about those too.
Yeah, that sounds great to me.
So why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself and introduce your books because you've got quite a few as well.
I do, yeah. They've all kind of snuck up on me over the last few years. But like Kayla said, I'm Herman Steuernagel, science fiction and fantasy author. I've been self-published now for the last 3 years, just about 4 years now. Been kind of writing my entire life, but only decided to take the plunge and start doing the novel length form in the last few years. So it's been quite a journey.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
you. So hold on, that's going on 10 books in four
Yes.
years.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I know.
Do
It's
you
a
have
comp. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, that's what I go ahead. You go ahead first.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a combination of just trying to make up for lost time and not doing much
Mm.
else. So
That's fair. But are
yeah,
you going to plan anything big to celebrate your 10th publication?
you know what? This is it. So for the bartender between worlds, which I'm sure we'll talk all about. It is my 10th book. So I am running a Kickstarter, which is starting next week.
Oh,
And I'm launching a special edition right off the cuff with it. So it's going to have gold foil, it's going to have illustrations and drink recipes and all that. So that's kind of my celebration for it being my 10th book.
that's fantastic. So, what I'll try and do then is I'll try and update this video with the link so
That'd
that
be
anyone
awesome.
who's interested can find that pretty easily. But congrats, that's all
Thank you very
very
much.
exciting.
Thank you. Yeah,
Did you?
it's. Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, no, by all means.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, it's stuck on me pretty quick.
Yeah.
That getting to this point. So
No, that's I can imagine if you're busy with trying to write it all, trying to get it all down, publish
mhm.
it, and then on top of that, that's not the only hat you wear as an author. You've also got a podcast, so managing that is also time consuming, and I don't know how you do it all.
I don't know either. Like I said, I don't do a whole lot else to be honest. So a lot of my free time is devoted to writing and running. I mean, now with the podcast for the last year, just about now. Yeah, it's just trying to squeeze everything in the little free time I have. Yeah.
Well, good on you because it's a lot to manage. And we're going to talk about all these in our chat today as well. We're going to talk about the different parts of it and aspects. But in terms of the Kickstarter, I'd love to know, was there something that you had your heart set on with getting in this edition?
Honestly, I would love to get an audiobook produced for this one. This is my
Okay.
10th book and I've yet to do an audiobook. So part of, the motivation for me doing this is to get an audiobook done. And also, I've got kind of the illustrations that my wife has done for me.
Oh,
That'll be
wow.
printed in color. I've got a gold foil dust jacket that's going to be printed on it. So I'm really trying to have fun with it.
That's fantastic. And lovely to have your wife involved in it too.
Yeah, I'm really excited that she was willing to jump in and do some illustrations for me because she hasn't done them for books. She's been an artist her whole life too. She does a lot of painting.
Wow.
Illustrations has kind of been more just a hobby for her, but she
Right.
was willing to step in, which has been great.
Well, hopefully this kind of kickstarts it for her. Maybe a
Yeah,
little interest in doing something more with her art. Not that she has
yeah,
to, but I
hmm
always love seeing that passion expand
hmm
when people love doing something, right?
for sure.
Uh,
Yeah, she's had a lot of fun with it too.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to seeing how it all comes out and what it looks like because I imagine you're going to get proofs and everything as well soon. And
Yeah, I've got, well, this doesn't have the foil on it, but that's going to be the design for the special edition.
oh, nice.
Yeah, so everything on the front here is going to be gold. The spine's going to be gold, and I've got a quote on the back that'll be gold too. I'm hoping it's supposed to get here to foil though, so I'm looking forward to seeing how that looks.
Ooh, so stay tuned, follow
Yeah,
along.
definitely. I'll share it when I got it.
Brilliant. We have a few others with us. Hello, Brighton. Good to see you. And Derek
Yes.
here as well. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Yeah, I had to get ready for summer, so the hair is gone.
There you go. Because it gets pretty hot in BC.
It does. I'm in the Okanagan, so that's it's the hottest, supposedly the hottest place in Canada during the summer. So we'll get in the
Yeah.
40s. Yeah,
Yeah, I think for a few steady years, BC has had record numbers for summer heat,
yeah,
which is crazy to think when you look at our winters and how cold they can get as well.
I know. Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's dive in with that balancing of these projects, because I'd love to hear some of your secrets on how you
Sure.
do this. So, in terms of your creativity, how do you prevent burnout when it comes to managing all of this?
Oh man, do I?
It's okay if you don't.
You know what? That is sometimes a problem for me. I work too hard. I try
Okay.
to push too hard because I want to get a lot done, and sometimes I don't manage that as well as I probably should. Um, I've having done this a few times now, I kind of recognize when I'm getting to that point though, and I try to pull back a little bit. Whether it's taking a weekend off and doing some reading, getting out on my bike, even just playing some video games or something, just to take a step back from the computer is really
Mm,
what I need. Um, and ensuring I get enough sleep. That's really what I
yeah.
find, that I'm getting up to that age and I'm really pressing to either hit a deadline or get stuff done. I find that my sleep suffers, and
Mm.
just making sure that I pull back enough that I'm getting enough sleep is definitely key.
Yeah, yeah. Sleep deprivation or disruption is really tricky to navigate. So
Hmm.
I'm glad you figured that out because sometimes it's hard, right? Sometimes you'll push yourself and keep going through that grind and really run yourself into the ground.
Yeah, yeah, and I found that in November. November, I published my last book, Resurgence, which is the poster behind me here. Um, and I published Chimera and Resurgence back to back, and I was running the podcast at the same time, and I definitely hit that point. So,
Yeah.
um, but I stopped my podcast for December, January. Took a step back from that, tried to kind of recoup and recover a little bit, and
Mm.
really gain some bearings. And that's kind of part of where this kind of cozy fantasy writing started.
Interesting. So
Hmm.
you kind of needed a little cozy in your life and you decided, well, I don't want to stop. So let's shift gears.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. Resurgence ended pretty dark, and the next book in that
Mm.
series is going to be quite a dark chapter. I started writing that one. I needed a little bit of a break from that.
Understandable. So,
Yeah.
in terms of that series, what's that series name, and how long are you anticipating it to be in terms of books?
Yeah, so it's my Fractured Orbit series. The first book I've got here is Eclipse, um, which came out early last year. Um, it's going to be a 5 book series, so I've got three
Okay.
out. I'm working on four, and five will wrap it up. So I'm hoping by early next year that series will be done.
Excellent. Okay. So, lots to look forward to. And are your other series already completed?
So I've got two other series. My Lives of the Guardian series is not completed. I've got one more book to do in that series.
Okay.
And then I've got a prequel series to that one, which is the Terra Hoffman Chronicles, and that series is completed. It's a 3 book trilogy. That's kind of a 200 years preceding the Lives of the Guardians.
Okay.
So,
So, I need to ask, in
yes.
terms of this cozy fantasy, is this a standalone or are you going to delve into it further, make it another series?
Yeah, so it's at this point it'll be a series of standalones. So
Okay.
the Bartender Between Worlds is a standalone on its own, but there's another kind of companion book that'll be coming out eventually that I've started on as well. Um, and which will also be a standalone. So I'm
Okay.
not until I've kind of got these other two series wrapped up. I'm not going to be starting another series. I do have a couple in mind, but it's I'm going to spend some time wrapping things up here in the next year.
That's fair. You've got a lot to juggle there, but I'm curious to see if you'll end up diving into that cozy fantasy again in the moment you need it.
Yeah, I imagine that I probably will. I have I've built this as a multiverse, and it's going to be a several genre
Hmm.
multiverse that kind of ties into this. But I definitely have a few ideas for some more cozies.
Excellent. I love to hear it. So, while we're on that note, then, um, from what I've read in cozy fantasy, everyone's perspective on cozy seems to be a little bit different. I'd love to hear what makes something cozy for you. What does a cozy story look like?
Yeah, going into this, I definitely took, and part of that, recovery from some burnout and trying to gain some perspective on that. I did, read quite a bit of cozy fantasy going into this. So, for me, cozy fantasy is really a lot of it's most, low stakes, feel good vibes, found family, and some sort of hopeful message going into it, right? So, like,
Hmm.
Legends and Lattes is kind of the classic cozy fantasy that everyone references, and that's really where a lot of cozy fantasy branched off from. Is somebody taking a step back and opening a pub or opening a coffee shop, opening a bookstore, that sort of thing. But there's a lot more out there to cozy fantasy. There's a lot of more of a low stakes adventures and low stakes different types of storylines. That kind of seems to be the baseline though. So yeah, for
Yeah.
me, it's a lot more about the stakes and a lot about kind of the relationships of the characters and building, um, kind of feel building a sense of belonging in the
Mm,
world. Yeah.
I love it. For me, found family just sold me.
Yes. Yeah,
It's
I think
always that. Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those tropes that I think has been in every cozy fantasy that I read.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm sure there are cozy fantasies out there without that trope, but it definitely seems to be a staple of the genre.
Yeah, I think it sticks for a few reasons. For me, I love that satisfaction you get in seeing someone who's struggled to find their place in the world,
Yeah,
but also that misfit feeling you get from all of these people, where it's not just one person, it's multiple people finding a home or a place and making a life for themselves, and just the hopefulness you get out of that as well. So.
definitely.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear because I know I've talked to some people who love it for the atmosphere, others who love it for the characters or, the storyline that goes with it. So I always love hearing it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
And in terms of, so I'm gonna come back because we kind of went on a footnote there, and that's totally my fault.
Sure. No, it's okay.
But you also manage all your social media, a YouTube channel on top of it all. And I'm blown away because just, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube is hard enough for me.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you manage quite a bit and it's very impressive. So do you
Thank you.
have a tactic when you're going into doing all of these?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm glad you're impressed by it because I feel like I'm scrambling with all of it to be honest. Yeah, no, it's okay. Like I try to keep up where I can. My tactic is I don't really have a set tactic to be honest. I
Okay.
just try to do what I can when I can. Social media is
Mm,
one of those things where I try to back off when I am starting to get overwhelmed, and all of a sudden I'll go quiet on social for a while.
yeah.
Um, some of the things is just realizing where my limits are. Like with TikTok, I really have a problem. Not a problem. I struggle with talking videos where I'm looking at the camera and coming up with something to say. It just takes a
Okay.
lot more prep for me, so I don't do those. You'll see my
Mm,
TikToks, and I have text. It's just me, and I'm kind of imitating Adam Beswick with that as well because that's worked well for him. That's actually the reason I started doing TikTok is because I saw his videos and I thought, well, I can do that. So that's what I
nice.
started. That's what I started doing, and it can get repetitive, but those are the ones that get views and engagements for me. So I continue to do them.
Yeah.
When I try to come up with something clever to say and do a talking video like this, they don't get the same views. I'm like, well, why am I putting the extra the extra time
Right.
into doing this, right? Um, Discord is another area where I struggle. Like I'm in a few Discord servers, but I'm not really engaged and involved because it's way too much for me to keep up with.
Yeah.
So I'm really impressed by people that are on Twitter and Discord and that sort of thing, because to me it's just like a fire hose
Yeah.
of activity, right? Um, yeah, Instagram's always been kind of the low hanging fruit for me. That's the one I feel most comfortable and easy with.
Okay.
So I'm probably most active on there, even though sometimes I don't feel like I am. But yeah, it's just kind of doing what I can. I don't really have a set strategy for it.
No, that's fair. I find it impressive.
Okay.
Every time I log in, there's a new video from you. I'm like, yeah.
Well, thank you.
And it's interesting to hear that those particular videos where, you have the text on the screen, get more engagement for you because I actually am the opposite. I feel awkward just staring into the screen without doing anything in particular, without a script or, an idea of what I'm going to
Hmm.
say.
Yeah,
Just looking at the camera and like looking around, I feel awkward.
that's funny.
So it's interesting to see the difference there.
Yeah, I love your cover reveal videos. I mean those
Thanks.
ones that you have there, I think are awesome. So I think that's working well for
Awesome.
you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard too. Like a lot of people will say, the ones where they're talking or they're coming up with some sort of educational content or that sort of thing. Those are the ones that perform well for them.
Yeah.
For me, I'm not sure the reason, but once I start talking, my my views drop. So I'm like, you know what? That's okay by me.
Yeah, no, stick with what you're comfortable doing with and what
Hmm.
works. That's how we find our audiences, really,
Exactly. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, a lot of it is just trying out a bunch of different things and seeing what works well for you, what works best, and then kind of going from there.
Absolutely. A lot of trial and error. And if you're keen on it, then tracking those analytics. If you're not, you don't
Yeah,
have to. You can get away for a long time without
for
it.
sure. Yeah.
So I'm going to open it up to our live chat as well. If you have any questions for Herman, pop those in the live chat. We will cover those as well. In the meantime, I do want to dive into your writing and your own personal enjoyment of stories.
Sure.
So I'd love to hear where your passion for stories started.
Yeah, it probably started. I mean, when I was a kid, I always loved stories. I always loved reading. I learned to read pretty early. I mean, even in kindergarten, I had already learned some basic reading. I remember my
Nice.
teacher asking me to read, to the kids, while she was busy doing something else. So that's some of my earliest memories there. Um, and then, I mean, my parents always had me read, so that's definitely
Mm,
where my love of story came from, reading at an early age. And then, as far as science fiction and fantasy goes, I grew up on Star Trek. My dad was a Star Trek
yes.
fan, so that's really where my love of sci-fi came from. I would watch Star Trek: The Next Generation with him, and from there, yeah, science fiction was probably my first introduction into speculative fiction. Fantasy came a little bit later, kind of when I was a teenager. But yeah, it's always been something that has interested me and that I've loved.
I love to hear it, and I love your choice on favorite Star Trek there because that's my personal favorite is Next Generation.
Yeah,
Um, there's I think, an understatement in people's view of Star Trek, in terms of people I've talked to, and they're like, "Oh, Star Trek, that's so boring." But when you delve into those political negotiations and how well those speeches are handled, and they touch on some deeper human topics as well,
yeah,
that would apply to modern day, you're like, "Yeah, no, that was really well done."
definitely, definitely. Yeah, I've watched some of all the Trek at this point.
Mm,
And yeah, Next Generation's my favorite. A lot of it's nostalgia too, but
yeah.
those storylines have always captivated me.
I love it. So, one of the questions I actually had because I had seen that in your bio you enjoyed Star Trek.
Hmm.
I'm really curious because it seems like you've gone dystopian, whereas Star Trek was more utopian. Where did that choice come in? Where you said, "No, you know what? I don't want to make a happy world."
Yeah, that's it. That's a great question. I also, I grew up in the 90s, so Star Trek was a big
Mm,
part of it, but there was also on the other side of things, there was, Demolition Man and Waterworld and all these kind of
yes.
dystopian movies of the 90s that I really enjoyed. Um, and I think it's those what if situations that have always intrigued me.
Right.
So my first series is kind of what if artificial intelligence takes over and we're
Mm,
forced into this world afterwards, and it introduces a bit of magic and that sort of thing in that storyline. But yeah, dystopia is just it's just been one of those things that has interested me. And then later on when the Hunger Games came out, I really enjoyed that series and
mm,
kind of that new wave of dystopia that took up from there.
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, would you ever consider writing a utopia version? Do you think there's enough what if there for you to work with? I
It
am
would,
I'm just curious, so I'm just picking
yeah.
your brain.
I think it would be hard for me to write a utopia
Okay.
without it being subversively dystopian,
Okay.
where it was somewhere like the island or like a perceived utopia that was actually a dystopia underneath. That's probably what it would
Interesting.
turn into if I set out to write a utopian story. To be fair.
And I mean, that sounds fantastic, in all honesty. But yeah, it's interesting. I always love hearing where that perspective comes from because there's a lot of inspirations that authors will pull from or take from, and how they put their own twists on it or where they end up in their own storytelling is always fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, and even like so with Fractured Orbit, it is somewhat dystopian, and even there, it's kind of a Red Rising type of dystopia too, even though it's space based.
Okay.
That's kind of really was a heavy influence for Fractured Orbit.
Oh, good to know. Did you have
Yeah,
other influences for it, or was that
there's definitely some influence from Wool, like Hugh Howey's Silo
okay?
series. There's definitely some of that in there, and then what else? I've been out of that realm for for a year now,
That's fair.
or 6 months or so. But yeah, there's definitely other influences in there. A collaboration of some of the sci-fi that I've consumed over the decades for sure. A little bit of The Expanse, for sure
Okay.
in there as well. Yeah.
Nice. And we've got we got John here with us. Good evening, Kay, and good evening, author I see on TikTok. There we go.
Hi,
See?
John.
We were just talking about social media and Herman's presence on there. So
Yeah,
fantastic timing.
I'm glad the traction's getting out there. It's working.
So we have a question from Derek as well. What are
Hmm.
your favorite author tools for outlining, drafting, editing, etc.?
Yeah, I'm not much of an outliner, to be fair. I do a little bit, but a lot of it's just kind of a loose Word document where I will set out chapter by chapter, I usually will do like a one sentence idea of where I want the story to go. By the time I get a few chapters in, that all goes out the window. and I, but I do try to plan a few chapters ahead just so I'm not getting way too off track and just to keep somewhat of a story arc. I do like the save the cat model of outlining. I'm just not very good at sticking to an outline when I create it, so I'm probably not the best one to ask about that. Um, as far as drafting, yeah, so but when I get to drafting, I use Scrivener. It works well, I find, for just breaking up my chapters and being able to move things around if I need to find things later. I started just writing in a Google Doc, and by the time you get halfway through the book and want to find something later, I found that a little more challenging to do. Um, I also use Trello a little bit for planning, not so much for outlining, but just for storyboarding. I'll often put like character notes and that sort of thing, world building notes into a Trello board, and that helps me keep things in a visual manner. Editing, Microsoft Word. By the time once I'm done my what I consider to be my first draft, I'll export it into Word. I'll do a final read through and then off to the editor. And a lot of that's just because the editors I've used have wanted a Word document, so it gets put into Word. And then when I get that back and the edits and the proofreads are done, I'll import that into Vellum, and that's my layout tool. So
I love it. And you said outlining isn't necessarily where you end up if you start planning. So I'd love to
uh,
hear how you navigate that as you're writing.
yeah, it differs. I find from every book. I'll start out, I'll have, depending on what I've conceptualized first, I'll have either, I'll have my characters, I'll have my world, and I kind of have a general sense of where I want the story to go. As I'm writing the characters, a character will come up, and all of a sudden I realize that for this character, a certain trajectory just won't work for them, or they've decided to go in another direction, and I'm like, that sounds actually way better than what I had planned for you, so I let them kind of go in that direction a bit. Um, but my writing's flexible because there's been a couple of books where I've gotten to the end of my draft and I realize, oh, just like a reader would get to the end of the book and realize how things all connect, I'll have that same realization, and okay, well now I've got to go back and make sure all the pieces actually align to get to this conclusion.
That's a
Yeah,
lot of work.
yeah,
Because you get to the end and then you have to go back, find all those little pieces, edit up, and that's a lot to keep track of.
yeah. Usually it's not so extensive that I have to do massive rewrites. I've
Okay.
only had to do that, I want to say once. But so for example, I in Chimera, I ended up Eclipse was a two-person point of view. In Chimera, I had kind of the main character split off from a friend of his, and then kind of in that process, I realized, oh no, this character is not done. She's not going to sit on the sidelines. She has her own story to tell. So I ended up adding a third point of view into that one, and it turned what was going to be a trilogy into a 5-book series because
My
I
gosh.
did that. Because all of a sudden I've got a third point of view, so that's an extra, X amount of words that have to be taken into consideration. So,
Okay.
and consistently I get told that that's people's favorite storyline in the book too.
I love
So
it.
yeah, yeah, it's I love it when that happens too because it makes my process a little bit more fun because it's just as surprising to me.
So I also appreciate that you start with a story, you start with an idea, and you let it expand as it's necessary to get that story out. Because if you were stuck on a trilogy and then trying to fit all that in, I imagine it'd be a lot harder to try and navigate everything you wanted to.
Yeah, sometimes it's to my own detriment. I think the 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 bartender between worlds was actually supposed to be a novella, but by the
Okay.
time I got into that novella territory, I realized there was more of a story to tell with, especially with the characters and with their interactions and the backgrounds between them. Because cozy fantasy is really character based. There's a lot of
Mm,
you know, ex- there was a lot more to explore in the main characters that I had introduced, even though it's a single point of view.
okay.
And I wanted justice to the story. So when I get
Mm,
to that point, I don't want to have to cut it short. So I do let myself explore, but
okay.
it does make
Yeah.
for longer stories than I originally planned.
I mean, readers, I'm sure, are not complaining.
Not so far, no.
There you go. I know for myself, whenever I finish a book and I go, I want more, that it's always a blessing when I hear, oh, don't worry, there's more. There's more
Yeah.
coming. So, in terms of your passion for stories and your love of telling them, at what point did you say, you know what, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a book or a series, whatever it started off as, and I'm going to publish it myself.
Yeah, I mean that's a few different questions I guess rolled
We
into
we
one
we
there,
can
but
spitball it
yeah, it's all
and
good.
take what you want out of it.
So yeah, I'll start, I guess, with when I first started to write a novel. 'Cause like I said, I've kind of been writing. Maybe I didn't say this, but I've kind of been writing short stories like all through high school and college
Right.
and that sort of thing. I always wanted to write. I always wanted to write a novel. I never thought that I could actually write a
Right.
novel. The story I tell all the time is I what drove me to finally actually put the book down was years and years later after university. I had a few buddies of mine um, convinced me to run a half marathon with them,
Oh,
and I
that's yeah.
yeah, it's a left turn, but we'll get
Yeah.
there. We'll get there. So I've never been a runner. I've never been athletic. I was the kid picked last in gym. So for me, I literally went from couch to running a half marathon in it was like 4 or 5 months.
Good on
And
you.
yeah, thank you. And it was just something that some friends of mine wanted to do, and I was like, yeah, sure. I had a few other transitions in my life at the time, so I decided that yeah, I'll do this. That's fine. It'll be good for me. I need to get in shape anyway. Um, so I did it, and after I had completed it, I had people coming up to me and saying, "Congratulations, Herman! Way to cross something off your bucket list." I was like, "Well, thank you," but it wasn't really something on my bucket list. It was just something I decided to do.
Yeah.
But it got me to thinking at that point. I had been running my own business up until that point, and but I had to give it up. And so I found myself with some extra time on my hands. So I was like, you know what, maybe it's time to do something that actually was on my bucket list and finally write that novel.
Okay.
So that was really the impetus for me starting to pen Lies the Guardians Tell. And I had an idea floating around in my head for a little while up until that point. So I just started writing and getting the idea down on paper.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
how it took a whole journey. It started with writing and or running and it ended up with
I
writing.
know, I know, and yeah, it's one of those things that I haven't done since. I haven't. I've wanted to run another half marathon since, but it's something I just
Okay.
haven't been able to do. A lot of it's because I've been spending all my free time writing. So getting out running is something I should put more of an emphasis on, but I just haven't yet. But
Yeah.
yeah, but if it wasn't for that, I probably would never have started this journey.
So how did that first experience go writing it? Where did you hit walls? Did you, you know, plow through it and then dissect it later?
Yeah, from what I remember of it now, it was a pretty seamless. It seemed like a pretty seamless process. It did take me a year to get that first novel written.
Yeah.
So I started in November of 2019, and I hit published in December of 2020.
Wow.
Um, so from what I remember, it was pretty straightforward. Now looking back at that first book, it's there's definitely some issues with it that I will eventually want
Right.
to go and clean up a little bit, but um, it was pretty seamless. The hurdles were trying to navigate the world of self-publishing, trying to find an editor, trying to find how to actually make this thing happen.
Yeah.
I had no idea that self-publishing was a thing when I started writing it, so there was also a lot of trying to figure out. At first, I was looking at traditional publishing, and then I found a few communities on Facebook and YouTube and that sort of thing, and realized that no, self-publishing is probably the way I want to go with this thing. But then
Yeah.
trying to navigate that entire world was a lot.
I imagine. So from the Facebook group, you, I imagine, delved into other communities. You were able to find some other resources to help?
Yeah, I the kind of the first resources I found was like Joanna Penn's podcast, the Creative Pen.
Hmm.
Um, Jenna Moressi's YouTube channel was kind of one of the first things that popped up when you search for self-publishing back then, at least. As well as the 20 books to 50K group and that sort of thing. Those were kind of the resources that first kind of presented themselves to me.
Okay.
And through there, it was just trying to find different things that worked and different ways that things happened.
Okay.
Um,
It's everyone's journey is so unique and how they end up self-publishing. So I always appreciate hearing how it goes. And
mhm.
compared to today
I
and
know.
publishing your 10th book, what's the biggest thing that has helped you along with that process?
Yeah, the biggest thing now, I've found, especially with starting the podcast that I have now and getting to know different authors in the community, the biggest thing that's helped is the community. Like getting to know other
Yeah.
authors, finally kind of finding this place where authors hang out and talk and get to know each other and that sort of thing has it's been a big help, and I've found that a lot more this in the last year or two than I previously had. In the first 6 or 7 books that I had written. So it's
Yeah.
that's definitely been a help. And anyone who's writing, and even if you're here watching this, you're probably in a in a good spot, because there's a lot of interaction, a lot of author interactions, and you kind of see them in the chat and that sort of thing too. But
Yes.
that's the biggest difference. Like I was trying to figure out a lot of this on my own right now, and I see some of these debut authors that are coming out now that seem like they know exactly what they're doing. I know it took. I know it like. I know it took them, a lot of learning to get there. But
Yeah.
you see with the break-in group and that sort of thing that they've built
Yeah.
this community of debut authors, which is fantastic. Which
Yeah.
I wish I had that sort of resource when I started my publishing journey,
Yeah.
because it would have made a world of difference.
Well, and you're not in it alone, right? You have someone to chat with, someone to talk about the process, even
Hmm.
just to say, you know what, I'm mad. I need to vent or anything like that, or
Hmm.
brainstorm with. That's important
Yeah,
too, I imagine, right? If you're stuck on something,
yeah,
being able to
definitely.
talk it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and and I definitely have some groups that I'm a part of that have been great. Like I'm part of Sasha Black's community,
Nice.
and her Rebel Author group, and that's been great. So I mean, there's lots of communities out there that people can get involved in.
That's fantastic.
Hmm.
If someone wanted to look about finding some of these communities or where they best fit in that community, where would you recommend they start? Should they just start with hashtags or something
Yeah,
specific?
that's a great question. I really think, depending on what genre you're writing in, is trying to figure out where the authors in that genre, other self-published authors, are hanging out.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
right, like for sci-fi and fantasy especially, like Twitter seems to oddly be the place that fantasy
Yes.
authors like to hang out, and that was really to my detriment for the first few years of publishing, because I didn't realize that, and Twitter's one of those things that I had, like, well, I don't want to be there, so I had left it, and it was only when Eclipse came out and I started, reaching out to some booktubers and bookstagrammers and that
Yeah.
sort of thing, and all of a sudden I started to get tags on Twitter, and I realized, hey, wait,
Oh,
there's people actually posting stuff here, and the book community here seems pretty active. And the more time
yes.
I've kind of spent on Twitter, I'm like, yeah, this is where the fantasy and sci-fi authors are hanging out,
Yeah.
and it's great because Twitter is good for absolutely nothing else. But somehow
I'll agree.
sci-fi and fantasy authors and readers have found this community on it and have
Yeah.
kind of and use the echo chamber that Twitter is to their advantage, because when I log into that account now, it's all book. It's
Yeah.
all book news and book tweets, which is great.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so I think if people are in the sci-fi fantasy community, that's a good place to start. Because if you're like me, you would have wrote off Twitter 3 or 4 years ago.
No, it's a good point because when I originally started my channel, I had an old Twitter account that I had not used. I didn't use social media for a long time before starting my channel. And I think it must have been something like 6 months or a year into it where I said, you know what, maybe I'll give it a go, see what's on there, see what happens.
Yeah,
And it's just crazy how that exploded.
yeah,
And Twitter is probably the platform I use the most outside of YouTube. Instagram, I'm just like a grandma with. I will probably, I don't know that I'll ever get comfortable with it. But, and then quite recently, I was like, you know what? Let's see what happens with TikTok.
yeah,
And it's amazing that all platforms are very different. I could post the
yeah,
same video on all platforms and they all get different
yeah,
engagement.
yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it is, and I don't, and I think it's just a result of the people who hang out on each of them. But
Yeah.
something that engages on TikTok won't hit on Instagram, but
Yeah.
the reverse is also true. It could hit on Instagram and get zero traction on TikTok. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a matter of trying to figure out the algorithms, and I don't know if I have yet.
No one needs to sacrifice their brain power for that. Just post what you want to
Exactly.
post.
Yeah. Right.
You can't it's like the people saying, "I'm going to post a viral video." Good luck
Good
to
luck.
you
Yeah.
because mostly it's accidental circumstances that end up in someone falling over.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there is some sort of strategy that you can employ to figure it out. Like storytelling is big on TikTok. If you can like hook, use the same mechanics that you use in storytelling, have a hook that draws people in, tell them a bit of a
Mm.
story, and then finish with a call to action or something. I know there's something to that. I
Yeah.
haven't figured that quite out yet, but
No, it's fair. I've heard people talk about it before where they come up with an idea and they try and think about how to get someone invested in that
Yeah.
idea. So I think in that example, she was a college student and she was trying to learn how to cook
Hmm.
to feed herself in college for the first time. And so she actually went to the streets and was asking people to give her recipes.
Oh,
And then
okay.
she went home and tried to make them. And
Okay,
it
yeah.
was, but all she had was the basic college dorm stuff. So, if they gave a crazy recipe, she'd have to find ways of baking
Cooking it.
it or
Okay.
cooking it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where, and then of course the payoff was what happened at the end,
Right.
right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is that follows that same framework. Really, the hook
Yeah.
is that she's this college student learning how to cook. The story is her trying to make these meals, and then the payoff
Yeah.
is the result, right? And it's an interesting premise in there too. So yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting what you can come up with, and it really is limited by your creativity and what I don't even say what you can do because there's a lot you can do. You can record on your phone, you don't have to
Hmm.
get fancy equipment. The sky's the limit depending on your creativity. So,
Yeah, and I find my hurdle with TikTok is time. Trying to like those videos are very time consuming, but
yeah.
I really like. I know that I'm Andrew Meredith. His recent videos for his
Yes.
cozy fantasy, they're so much fun. I really love what he's doing. If people haven't seen that, they should go and check out his Instagram because yeah, he is fun
Yeah.
with it, and that's something that I wouldn't. I don't have currently have the time to orchestrate of
Yeah.
a little skit like he's got set up, but it's so much fun. It does show what you're able to do with it.
Yeah, definitely. And for anyone who's not quite sure what the skit is, it's basically the author dressed up as a character from his book, and he's in a whole like fantasy veterinarian setting, and he's got people in the background dressed like the characters and stuff, and he's acting as though he's the character and introducing the book. So really creative in that regard too, and
Hmm.
I love it. I love seeing characters come to life and authors living those characters, that's really cool. In a cozy fantasy, because depending on the genre, very scary. It
True,
could get
very true.
it could get scary. So, we have Joe here as
Oh, hi Joe.
well. Welcome,
Good to
good to
see you.
see you. And Derek, I would love to hear this as well. I'd be curious to know about bookish pet peeves, the pettier the better.
Bookish pet peeves. Now, are you talking about pet peeve like in books, um, like tropes and that sort of thing, or
I would imagine,
okay,
it could be if you have pet peeves about the physical form or, anything, that's story related. I say
yeah.
whatever gets you petty.
Yeah, I don't like cracked spines, or
Mm,
or dog-eared pages. Those are
thank
probably
you.
some of my pet peeves with them. Um, but tropes, as far as trope goes, miscommunication drives me crazy. If
Thank
an
you.
entire plot line can be solved by just somebody asking a question or saying something, it drives me nuts.
Yep.
So that's probably my main one. I'm sure there are others, but none are coming to
Okay.
mind. Yeah.
If you think of one, by all
I'll
means,
I'll jump in.
we'll
I'll jump with it. Jump in with
yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, we can jump conversation for that. That's
Hmm.
worthy. So, in terms of creating your characters, I know you said that when you're writing them, they kind of develop and go off on their own. Is that something that originally started that way, or did you try and sit down and plan out who these characters were?
Yeah, when I first started, if you Google character development, you'll come up with these checklists of 500 things about your character that have nothing to do with the story, and that your character, like who your
Yeah,
character's teacher's pet was in third grade, um,
it's
you know,
important details.
right? Um, when I first started writing I kind of went down that route and realized very quickly this was a waste of my time. Um, my characters have always started off with an idea for me, and I don't have a tangible way of saying where this idea comes. A lot of it is just this is what is in my head, and so
Okay.
I'll sometimes write down some notes about base personality traits or looks or whatever is coming to my mind. I'll take down those notes, and then kind of put them into a situation of what's happening in the main kind of plot or world of my story, and kind of let see what happens from there.
Okay.
And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. And I have to go back and say, this character wouldn't say this or do this in this situation. They would.
Mm,
I need to divert them a little bit, but But typically that's my method, and I'm surprised sometimes at how um, those situations develop and how characters develop. For me, in the Bartender Between Worlds, I had one character that I was really struggling with who she was supposed to be in the story, and
Okay.
I was trying different things with her, and they weren't working. I was trying to make her, kind of a snippy, sarcastic character, and she fought back against that. And she's like, "That's not who I am here." And it took me. Sometimes I have to figure out the character through the story, just as a reader does, and find out, okay, by the time I get to the halfway mark, how does this character fit in this world? Because they've got to kind of fit with the theme of the story. They've got to fit with the dynamic of the protagonist, especially.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes that it doesn't quite fit until I've got a few pieces in place, and then I kind of see how they work out. And maybe it's more work. I know some people have a lot more luck building out the character profile up front. My brain doesn't seem to want to work that way usually, though.
No, that's fair. I
Mm-hmm.
think, you have to find your own way of doing everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone can give you detailed list or steps on how to write a book, but inevitably you have to find your own voice with it, and
Yeah.
a lot of that is going to be trial and error. Even with this being your 10th book,
Yeah.
you're still learning, which I personally love to see because we're people, we're humans. We don't stop learning.
Yeah, I envy people who say that, by the time they wrote their third book, they had their process in check, because every book
Yeah.
has been somewhat different for me. With Chimera and Resurgence, the first time ever I knew the end before I started writing them. I knew kind of where, obviously I knew the starting point because they started where Eclipse ended, but
Right.
but I had a specific end in mind, and it took me 900 pages to get to that end.
Wow.
But I eventually got there. But up until that point, endings are usually the hardest thing for me to come up with. Like having that end scene usually takes a lot of figuring out for me.
Okay,
Um,
interesting. And you mentioned audiobooks
mhm.
earlier. I'd love to know because I know you said you're really hoping to maybe get an audiobook for this cozy fantasy. Is there an audiobook narrator you have in mind? Have you already kind of done some check-ins on that? If you can
Yeah,
share.
I don't have one specifically in
Okay.
mind. I have a profile of who I would like, but I haven't gone down that road yet
Okay.
to select someone. I kind of know what type of voice I kind of need for the story, but um, I've kind of let myself not go down that road until I'm
That's
at the point where I'm able to produce it, right?
Yeah, no, that's
Um,
fair. If you could pick your dream narrator, who do you think it would be? If you even
oh
have
man,
one on.
yeah, I'm not good with names, to be
Okay.
honest. I mean, like, I could tell you, I could probably only name three audiobook narrators.
Okay.
I mean, if,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so I might not, I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry.
No, no, don't. No need to apologize. I'm just curious because I listen to a lot of audiobooks as well.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm always on the look for narrators and
Yeah.
and the stories that they voice.
I've only just started listening to audiobooks in the last year or so. It wasn't,
Oh,
I had a
interesting.
hard time with them, just concentrating on them, but I
Okay.
really got to a point where I wanted, like, my TBR is just getting out of control like everyone else is. I'm like, I need
Yes.
to find a way to make this happen. And it wasn't until I picked up Project Hail Mary by Andy
Mm,
Weir and it was just on a whim. It was like, I think it was on sale on Amazon. I'm like, well, I'll try this one, and I could not put it down. I was listening to that thing nonstop,
yes.
and that was really my gateway into audiobooks, because before then, my attention span would just not let me concentrate enough on them.
Right.
And then since then, I still have problems with some, but since then I've definitely been upping my reading count with audiobooks, and because I can listen to them on my way to work, I can listen to them kind of
Yeah.
when I'm making supper, or, whatever. So it's helped me
Yeah.
get a few extra hours of reading time in. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I completely agree. Like for myself, audiobooks are a huge help. I personally love immersion reading, so I'll listen
Mm.
to the audiobook as I'm reading the ebook or physical copy.
Okay.
But then it's nice because when I do have to be an adult and do things like cooking and chores and all of that, I can just keep the audiobook in and keep going with the story while I'm doing these monotonous tasks. No one wants to do those.
Oh yes. Yeah. Yeah, I find when especially if I'm writing and especially when I'm editing, for me to sit down and read a book at the end of the night, like my brain is tired. I do web design as my
Yeah.
day job, so by the time I get to like off time, reading is sometimes a challenge. So that's another way audiobooks have really helped me out with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great to hear. And so let's shift gears here
Hmm.
for a moment and dive into your podcast. So you've got your writing going, you've got your day job, you've got your reading going, and then you go, "Hey, I want to do a podcast too." How
Yeah.
does that all start?
Yeah, because I needed something else to fill my time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so really the reason it started was I was listening to a few podcasts, science fiction and fantasy writing podcasts, around the time Eclipse came out. Um, and there was a podcast at the time called Read It with Whiskey with Laura Gentinen. I'm not sure if listeners are
Okay.
familiar with her, but she ended that podcast right around this time last year, actually.
Oh,
And she interviewed a lot of indie authors, and her focus was sci-fi fantasy. And at that time, I was also listening to SFF Addicts and
mm.
Daniel Kuhlba's podcast on sci-fi and fantasy fanatics. Those were really the only ones at the time that I was listening to. I mean, there's definitely a lot of YouTube channels that I've found since then, including yours and Nicholas Fuller's and a few
Yeah.
others, right? That have been nice. But at that time, I was like, this is kind of a gap that feels like
Mm.
needs to be filled. And I came home and talked to my wife that night when she said she was quitting her podcast, and I asked her, I'm like, "Do you think it'd be crazy for me to do this?" And she's like, "No, that's a great idea." And at the time, it's kind of a convoluted story because not all these pieces are out yet, but I do have another
Yeah.
cozy fantasy book related to this book, which the title is "The Greatest Pub in the Multiverse,"
I
which
love it.
I had already started at that time. I didn't know it was going to be a cozy at that time, but I had the title. So my wife is actually the one who said you could call it the greatest podcast in the multiverse.
I
I was
love
like,
it.
yeah, okay. Now I've got the perfect title for this podcast, so I've got to start. I've got to start it. So
Yeah.
that's how I started going down that road. I started, just chatting with a few of my friends and having some conversations with them just to see if I could get the feel for it. And it was really nice because as authors we don't often get to chat with other authors, and we're kind
Mm.
of in our bubble. And it was nice just to once a week have be able to have a conversation with another author. So yeah, I just kind of ran with it from there, and I'm on episode 32 now.
Good
Um,
on you.
yeah, so
Congrats.
thank you. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah.
But that's really kind of how it got started. It's on a whim.
But that's sometimes where the best projects come from,
Hmm.
right? You're not
Definitely.
sure where they're gonna go. You're just gonna give it a try and see what happens. And
Yeah,
I feel like you get a lot out of it for that
definitely.
reason. But
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, like, and I'm sure, like, like, I mean, really
Mm,
the greatest thing that has come out of it is being able to talk to other authors and
absolutely.
building my author, network, and just getting to know other authors in different stages of their journey. Some of them have been bestsellers, some of them have just been on their first book, um,
Yeah.
and really, it's been a lot of fun. A lot of different great conversations have come out of it.
I imagine. And I would love to know, out of the conversations you've had so far, is there one that really struck home for you, something that gave you more insight into your own writing craft?
That is that's a great question. Everyone's kind of gives a little piece of different piece of advice, and
We have Joe here interjecting. Feel
Joe's
free to
conversation.
answer.
Joe was great to talk to. Like,
He
definitely,
absolutely
yeah,
is.
he was so much fun, and I'd love to chat with him again for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'm not saying that just because he jumped in. That's funny. I'm
No,
glad you did.
I've had Joe on the channel too. He's absolutely phenomenal to chat with. He's a lot of
Definitely.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the, I have had a couple of guests who I never thought would agree to come onto the show. Christopher Rocchio, I chatted with, and,
Yes,
and
I
that
saw
he was
that.
just such an interesting person to talk to. Um, I had Edward Ashton, who wrote Mickey Seven. and we talked
Yeah.
about the movie that's coming out based on his book, which was a really interesting conversation because it's very different than most of the authors I get to talk to.
Yeah, it's an
Um,
adaptation. You have a lot more
mhm,
to like a whole other field to discuss.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, and yeah, I see Joe's comment there about Rockio. Yeah,
Oh,
that was a great chat. I could have talked with him for hours,
yeah.
but I tried to keep it to be respectful of his time. And then I just chatted with Andrew Meredith, and that was a
Yes.
fun chat. We were talking about the cycles of fantasy and that sort of thing. That's a great conversation. That's going to be coming up this Tuesday for
Oh,
people that are interested
nice.
in that. But yeah, everyone's got a different nugget, and I'm always surprised at what comes out of them, and that's why I love putting together kind of the little trailer hooks that I come out with, kind of to preview the episodes, because everyone's got a
Yeah.
little something to share.
Absolutely. It's amazing the conversations you can have, the different perspectives, and then depending on the topics you're going into as well, you can go down those rabbit holes of, the cycles of fantasy like you were saying. It's
Yes.
and Andrew Meredith is a wealth of information in terms of fantasy and character arcs and everything like that and archetypes and
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff. So I can only imagine what that episode will be like. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's one of my longer episodes for sure. But I mean, I skipped over a lot of the questions that we had just to wrap it up in in interest of
Yeah.
time. But yeah, it was the same with Rockio. We started talking about
Yeah.
the Roman Empire, and you get him start talking about the Roman
Yeah.
Empire. It's you're in for a long chat, but it was great. I loved every minute of it.
So here's a question for you as host to host
Hmm.
in that sense. How do you find the topics that these authors are so passionate about that they want to go down those rabbit holes?
I approach it in a few different ways. One, I do try to read their books before
Mm,
I interview them. I can't always, so I'll try to read at least a little bit of their books, especially if I can't. Especially if I don't have the time to read an entire book ahead of time, I'll try to listen to another interview of theirs that they've done, or maybe
right.
sometimes a couple, because that's something I can do at work.
Oh,
I
nice.
can, I can put on an interview in the background, and that's when a lot of times when I listen to these conversations, um, is kind of I don't often get to the live ones, but I'll listen to them afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So what I'll often do is try to listen to a couple of interviews just to kind of get a feel of what does seem interesting to them, and especially if there's a question in there that I didn't get an answer to that I want to learn more about.
Right.
I'm able to like piggyback on that and ask them a more in-depth question.
Nice. I love it. Yeah, I usually try and do some homework before I dive in, but
Yeah,
it can be tricky. Every conversation's different, right? And you
yeah,
never know what's going to come up. So it's always a
exactly.
fascinating experience. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that.
yeah, no problem.
We have Bo here with us as
Oh, hi,
well.
Bo.
Welcome, Bo. Good to see you. And in terms of the podcast itself, because like you said, it kind of started on a whim. I'd
Hmm.
love to hear what you have in mind. Do you have anything in mind now for what you want the future of it to be? Are you happy with it the way it is for now and we'll take developments as it comes?
Yeah, I think it's at this point it's probably going to be a slow evolution of what it turns into. I feel like I'm finally hitting a stride with where I'm at with asking the questions and asking the reciprocal questions. It really was out of my comfort zone to start it.
Yeah.
The first 10 episodes were probably a little rough on, but really being able to find um, those interesting things, the things that are interesting to the guests, I think has really helped. And I think if I kind of move in any direction, it will be working to getting to know a little bit more about the author behind their story, a little bit more about their personal lives and kind of what drew them into, not what drew them into writing, but what they do besides writing. But also getting in the other direction specific writing advice. That because I know that a lot of the listeners are not only readers, they're also writers. So getting some writing advice that'll be helpful for people listening.
Absolutely. I love to hear it. I know there's so many aspiring authors and authors who are already established, but with everyone's experience being so different, you can find advice or help anywhere,
Yeah,
which is, it's nice to see there's more openness in talking about it. Because I
Definitely.
know at a certain point in almost any field, but this one as well, there was a lot of secrecy in the craft and
Mm.
how authors came about writing their stories before eventually it opened up and more people could do it themselves and learn about it.
Yeah, I thought that way too when I started. I was like, who's going to want to talk to me? Are they going to even want to
Yeah.
tell me about their stories? But everyone I've talked to has been so open and so
Mm.
willing to speak and willing to give advice and
Yeah.
really helpful. And that's one of the best things about doing the podcast so far is just being able to hear advice from other authors.
Absolutely. And something I like to ask because I always love hearing what authors are passionate about, aside from the writing and everything like that. Has there ever been a topic you haven't had the opportunity to discuss, but you've been really waiting for it and you'd love to chat about?
Oh, not really. It's funny,
And that's great.
with when Nicholas, I did kind of a questionnaire for Nicholas to go on his show,
Yeah,
and one of the questions was, what's something interesting, what's something interesting about you? And I was like, I don't. Writing's the interesting thing about me. That's what I talk
right.
about normally outside, right? Um, yeah, I mean, I do other things. Like, I mean, I cycle. I run a little bit. I do web design. That's my day job. Um, but really, like at this point where I'm at now, what I'm passionate about is writing. What I'm
Yeah.
passionate about is learning more about the craft, learning more about other writers, other fantasy authors, and sci-fi authors as well, and learning as much as I can. Really, that's kind of where I'm
Okay.
at my point. So, as far as other topics that I'm burning to talk about, well, I mean,
It could be about
not
writing
really,
if you
right?
would like.
Yeah, yeah. Um, hmm.
It could be an aspect of storytelling. It could be, how you work prose or anything like that too, if it's a topic that you're passionate about and you just haven't had the chance to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And it's all
Well,
right if you don't have one.
that's a good
Totally.
question. You caught me off guard with the question, so I
That's
feel,
all right.
yeah, that's. I don't have anything out on the top of my head for that.
No worries. Well, it's good to hear your passion for it because it's evident.
Thank
I
you.
love seeing your passion for writing and telling these stories. And I know you said you have some books to look forward to in the series that are currently existing,
Hmm.
and with the upcoming Kickstarter as well. There's lots to look forward to. So I do hope to continue to see more books come out from you and more stories, and that passion just continue to flourish.
Yeah, there's definitely more to come, so I'm not definitely not done yet.
Love it. And Bo here has a question. What is your web platform of choice that you like to develop on?
Yeah, so we work with a couple of different. We work with WordPress a lot. We work with Craft CMS is kind of the other platform. So we develop with PHP, but I do mostly style. I do mostly design. So I do a lot of CSS work. Is typically what I work with. So I kind of do the. I'll take the mock up and turn it into the pretty picture on the web kind of thing.
You work your magic there.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to open it up to the live chat as well. If you have any wrap up questions for Herman, by all means, pop them in while we're waiting because there is that delay. I do have another question for you.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back into your writing, but I would love to know, is there a theme, a trope that you would love to tackle in your own form?
Hmm. A theme or a trope that I would love to tackle. Yeah, I don't know about a theme or a trope. I really would
Okay.
like to do an epic fantasy, though. I kind of have
Oh,
something
interesting.
brewing in the background that I've been working on that I will eventually get to once kind of my initial series have wrapped up.
Yeah.
Um, it might tie into the multiverse that of the Bartender Between Worlds. It might be kind of exist in the same
Ooh.
kind of universe. Because I do have something in mind and something that I've kind of been picking away at for a couple of years. But that's really what I want to work on. A lot of my stories so far have been kind of either the small town person that's kind of in a small world, and then that world opens up as the story progresses, and that's one of the tropes that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
Something that I kind of grew. I mean, I grew up in a small town, so it definitely is one of those experiences that I've had that definitely finds its way into my writing.
I love to hear it. All right. Well, with that being the case, we'll give
Hmm.
another minute there for live chat just because there is that delay. But
Yeah.
if with all of that coming up, where
Hmm.
can everyone find you? How can they follow you? And what is the best way to stay in touch for those updates?
Yeah, the best place to start is my website, hermansteuernagel.com. And from there, you can kind of find my links to everywhere else. Like I said earlier, I'm probably most active on Instagram, but I'm on TikTok quite a bit as well. Instagram, Herman Steuernagel Writes is my handle, I believe, there. And it's the same on TikTok.
Okay.
Yeah, Twitter, I'm H underscore Steuernagel, and of course, if you're looking for my podcast, you can find it anywhere by searching for the greatest podcast in the multiverse.
I love it. And for anyone watching here as well, you can find the links in the description below as an easy way of following Herman. Guys, go check out his books, go check out the podcast. I mean, with that kind of name, greatest podcast in the multiverse, you are not going to be disappointed. And thank you so much, Herman, for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Kayla. This has been a lot of fun, and I really enjoy that. Sorry, I really enjoy that you've had me here. It's been great.
Likewise, it was great chatting, and I'm looking forward to that cozy fantasy myself. And I've got, I think, yeah, I do. I've got my notification set in my calendar for release
Awesome.
day. And remember, folks, as well, there is that Kickstarter coming out soon too for the I'm terrible with name. Bartender Between
Bartender Between
Worlds.
Worlds. Yeah.
Brilliant. Bartender Between Worlds Kickstarter is coming out soon. Do you have a date for that?
May 25th is
May?
the launch date. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, next a week from today, if you're watching live, I'm going to be doing a live launch party with Joshua Del Toro on TikTok for
Nice.
that as well. So if people are interested in that, definitely. If you head to my TikTok, I've got a stitch with him that'll take you to his channel, and I'll definitely be
Perfect.
linking there in the next week. So
I'll
yeah,
try and find the link for that too, and I'll try and
yeah, I can
update
send that
the
to you too.
description. Thank
Yeah,
you. So, yeah, congrats again. Thank you
thank you
so
so
much for
much.
joining, and we'll chat again.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us, for chatting with us. And as always, take care of yourselves.